Tonight on Up Close, one of America's most powerful media executives who was referred to us by one of Hollywood's most prominent filmmakers. That's what makes their names familiar, but it's almost incidental to the extraordinary life experience they have in common. Each man has survived a set of experiences that should have killed him. Up close, Sumner Redstone, the chairman and CEO of Viacom, Inc. If the name Viacom is unfamiliar to you, perhaps it'll help if we break the parent corporation down into some of its component parts. CBS, MTV, Paramount, Blockbuster. That's the communications empire presided over by Sumner Redstone. But this is no ordinary businessman. He was a Harvard law student during World War II and was selected to join a special intelligence group to break Japan's military codes. The man I referred to earlier, the Hollywood filmmaker who directed our attention to Mr. Redstone, is Robert Evans, who was the subject of an earlier Up Close.
I had 3 strokes in 2 days. And a man named Sumner Redstone, who was chairman of the board of Viacom, he, many years ago, suffered a terrible tragedy. He was almost burned to death. And he flew out from Boston and held my hand right in the ICU, let him in, because he knew he was the only person who could encourage me to live. He said, "You're going to make it, because I made it and you can make it. And if I can make it burnt to death, you can make it through this stroke."
The man who did that interview with Robert Evans was my Nightline colleague, Don Dahler.
Ted, Sumner Redstone has a reputation as being one of the toughest opponents you'd ever want to face across the negotiation table, or the tennis net for that matter, because he simply hates giving up. The fire Evans is referring to happened at the Copley Plaza Hotel in Boston in 1979. With burns over half his body, Redstone managed to climb out a window and hang on with one hand. After he was finally rescued, he underwent 60 hours of surgery and was told he'd never walk again. You'll hear Redstone say the experience didn't change him. But it's worth noting that before the fire, he was a moderately successful businessman. After the fire, he started on a path of aggressive corporate takeovers and turnarounds that have made him one of the most powerful executives in the entertainment industry.
I really did feel I'd been to hell and back, because the pain caused by fire, and you know, my body was almost 50% burned.
This was the hotel fire?
Yes, it was.
79?
79, and I made the classic mistake. I opened the door. I was surrounded by flame. I remember, you know, thinking, what a way to die. You know, I was burning alive, and I got to a window, it wouldn't open, and somehow or other I got to another window, got the window open, and hung out with this arm.
You were outside hanging on?
Yes.
Now you were 3 floors up, is that correct?
Just high enough so that if I jumped, I was dead.
So we were hanging on. What were you thinking? What were you doing?
I'm going to live. I'm going to live. I had a passion to survive, and I hung out that window. It must have been 10 minutes until, you know, a fire engine came and took me down.
And you could feel the heat and the flames?
Well, you know, by that time, the only thing in the flames was my arm, and my arm was totally burned. As a matter of fact, my wrist was almost severed, and people said I would never use it, but I play tennis with that arm today.
And you said you were counting to 10? You kept
over
counting?
and over and over.
What was the significance of that?
Just to keep hanging in until someone came to rescue me. If I thought that I would survive, it would have been much easier to drop rather than have my arm burnt, my hand burnt. But I knew that at that height, I would die if I jumped, so what did I have to lose by hanging on?
Now you, in interviews that I've read, you do not ascribe much importance to that moment in terms of creating the character.
No.
In,
I mean,
increasing
people
your
like
character.
to think that something like that is some seminal event that's going to change their life, their priorities, their values. Not at all. I was exactly, other than some physical harm, I was exactly the same person after the fire that I was before. I don't think a person's character, personality change after the age of 3 years old, frankly.
I don't think it necessarily changed you. I think what it does is it reveals you. I think that the Sumner Redstone, who went to the toughest school in the world and succeeded more than anybody else had before, is the same Sumner Redstone who hung onto that ledge and wasn't going to let that fire
Beat him. I think there's something to that, yes. You know, I always tell my children and my grandchildren, because I believe it, that success is not built on success. It's built on failure, frustration, and sometimes catastrophe, and how you deal with it. Blockbuster was a great example. In a way, it was like a second fire, although not as hurtful. But when Blockbuster failed, we didn't let it fail. We had a major failure, really a catastrophe, because it could have brought Viacom down. But the way we dealt with it, we developed what we call revenue sharing. Instead of paying $65 a tape, we pay about $6, but we give a percentage of revenue to the studio. The result was great for Blockbuster, great for the studios, and particularly great for the consumer. In fact, Blockbuster was a greater and is a greater company today than it was before this occurred. So that certainly is a good example. People once asked me what was a quality that I least liked in other people, and I said patience.
Up Close, brought to you by Unisom.
You are 79.
No, I'm not. You believe that same scurrilous... I should sue somebody someday.
Well, you know, if you do the
age.
math, you were born in 23.
Well, no. I think, don't you mean 53,
Okay.
43?
You know, there's a great quote from Tom Sawyer, saying it so, don't make it so.
That's true.
You're 79. 3 networks you control have some of the youngest viewers of any network.
Yes.
Do you even pretend to understand what they want to see?
Absolutely.
You do?
You don't have to be the same age. I think from the very beginning, when we first acquired Viacom, which meant MTV and Nickelodeon, which, by the way, everyone wanted us to sell, including the banks, and MTV was considered a fad. While I did not then understand all the business, I did understand that MTV was not just a music channel. It was a generational channel. It was a cultural channel. And the result, of course, is that today, MTV is almost in 400 million homes. This fad, only 15 years ago, is now in almost 400 million homes around the world.
Do you sometimes catch yourself wincing when you see some of the programming that's on it?
No, because I just won't watch the program. No, you know, I understand that MTV has been sometimes criticized for some of its programming. You have to remember, we have to satisfy the consumer.
So programs like Jackass on MTV, some of the music videos that are fairly risque.
I don't see anything wrong in our society with sensuality. You know, I don't think there's anything that even approaches the obscene on MTV. But yes.
But that's a subjective judgment.
No. Well, yes, but you know, as somebody said, I don't know how to define obscenity, but I know it when I see it. One of our Supreme Court justices said that. But the fact of the matter is, to some extent, it's subjective. I think people's views differ on what's objectionable. There's some wonderful sensual dancing, and what's wrong with that?
Shifting subjects here for a second. What